Okay, so this is July 21st, 2020, and I'm Kristin Catherwood, the Director of Living Heritage with Heritage Saskatchewan. And I'm here today with Beth Graas, and we're going to be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic in Saskatchewan in 2020 as part of the COVID-19 Culture, a Living Heritage project of the pandemic in Saskatchewan. So thanks for agreeing to speak with me today, Beth.
Oh, my privilege.
And so we'll just go ahead and first of all, just tell me, well, we've already introduced your name, but just tell me when and where you were born and where you're living.
I was born in Weyburn, Saskatchewan. I was raised on a farm about 5.5 miles southeast of Saskatchewan, of Weyburn, sorry. And it's just north of Nickel Lake. And that park, my grandmother was, instrumental in the planting and whatnot. And she'd be absolutely dumbfounded by what it's come to be. And right now, Dawn and I met in film teaching school in Fillmore, Saskatchewan. And right now we live on a farm. Well, we've lived on a farm for almost all of our married life. We moved into this home in 1982, and we raised 3 children here. And we're on a farm close to Belle Plaine, but closer to the potash plant called Mosaic, and the fertilizer, urea, ammonia plant called Yara. I worked at Yara for, I think about 5 years when they were starting up. And starting up was 1992, and our son arrived in 1992. And so shortly after that, I didn't work at the plant anymore.
So you're a rural person born and raised and all the way through.
Correct. I'm proud to say that.
So Beth, so here we are, it's July 2020. And if you could just go back a few months in your memory, and do you remember what you first thought, what you were thinking when you first heard about what we now know as COVID-19? When the news first broke about this virus that was originating in China, do you remember your thoughts at the time?
Yes, my thought was it'll never get here. Much like SARS, I mean, it got to Toronto, but we were not affected by SARS at all. And I thought this would be very similar to that, and that it would be soon under control and we'd have no issues with it. I really didn't think it would get this far. And of course, like many others, I was very surprised when it spread as rapidly as it did.
So when did your life and your family's life start to change? Do you remember? How did it start to change your everyday life?
It certainly made us more cautious. Living on a farm is a lot better than living, say, in an apartment anywhere, but especially an apartment in Toronto. I don't know how those families did it, especially if they have teenagers, but little kids too, like, oh my goodness, I just can't imagine it. Anyway, living on a farm, it really hasn't changed our lives a whole lot, except that we're more cautious. And when I go to the grocery store, I was wearing a mask. And I know that didn't protect me, but I didn't want the grocery stores to close, and I wanted them to see that I was being respectful of them being open. I don't wear one now. And if things increase in Saskatchewan, as it has in the last week, shall we say, I will be going back to wearing a mask, because I want them to be, appreciative of the fact that I appreciate them being open. And I have to say that our superstore in Moose Jaw, I don't know the manager there, but man, she just did a wonderful job of managing this whole thing. I never ever felt uncomfortable, unsafe. It was clean and tidy. And then they opened it up for seniors starting at 7 a.m. And that was even better. I could go in there and there was hardly any people in there. And and that is our major thrust is, going to the grocery store, obviously. So.
Right. And so how did your local community respond? And that could be your town or any groups that you belong to, or your kind of your local neighborhood. Did things change there? What went on to sort of deal with what was happening?
Well, church services stopped. And thank goodness. I mean, eventually they were legislated, but even before that, they had said no. We attend West Hill Baptist Church in Regina, and they stopped the services. And it was, like I said, I wouldn't have been going anyway, but that's our biggest thing, is that we don't go to church on Sunday morning. Other than that, we don't have a whole bunch of commitments. We're Legion members, and so of course that was closed then too, and so we couldn't go in there if we so choose. But I mean, it's not like we're in there on every Friday night or go for coffee every day or whatever. We don't do that. So like I said, our lives really haven't changed a whole bunch. I'm also a member of the Regina Horticulture Society, and our meetings have stopped also. We gathered once a month for educational meetings, and I'm what do they call me? The area anyway, and we always have coffee and a snack after the meeting. It's really a nice time. It builds community, I feel, and so it's really a nice time. But when we go back to meetings, I doubt whether we'll have food.
Okay, right. So did your church adapt in any way to be able to offer services during this time, even though you can't get together in person?
Oh yes, we go online. We have our church services, but that's not, well, I think they've expanded it now, but that's not new. Our services have been online for I don't know, a long time. Certainly not since we've been members there, but wasn't long after that they started doing that. And it's just been a real ministry for the shut-ins. And of course now we're all shut-ins, right? So it's been wonderful, but they've, now they would record the service, of course, at the front of the church, but now we have musicians recording in their own homes and putting it, getting it ready for online. I can't imagine, I'm not a very techie person, but I know enough about it. I can't imagine how many hours our tech team puts in getting the service together. And I know the pastors have said several times from the pulpit that it's hours and hours, and they're there even at the beginning of the week, getting stuff ready. And I've been on the worship team, and I'm so appreciative of their professionalism, because working with a bunch of amateurs like we are, I can't imagine, just how frustrating it must be sometime, but they always make you feel like, you're number one, and it's a wonderful team. Randy Neufeld is the head of the show, so and he does a wonderful job. But I know it's a lot of work, and it's all volunteer, so kudos to them.
Mm-hmm. So how did you keep in touch with family and friends when really there was kind of a quarantine going on? How did you keep in touch?
Oh, lots of phone calls, and we FaceTimed with our grandkids a couple of times, and that's great, but it's not the same as being able to give them a hug. A couple of times we took food over and some little trinkets over to their house. They live in White City, and dropped it off on the step, and then their mom, our daughter, would send us video or pictures of them with their loot. And it was nice. It was just, it's very rewarding. My niece lives close to Stoughton, Saskatchewan, and she was very, very ill. She didn't have COVID, but she was very ill. And so I took a care package down to her, and just dropped it off on the doorstep, and they were ecstatic. She has 3 little kids, and oh my goodness, I don't know how she did it. But anyway, they're on the mend, and they're doing well, so that's good.
Good. So as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, we have seen recently in Saskatchewan, there's been quite a few new cases. Are you concerned about that? Are you changing your behavior at all at this point? How are you feeling about this pandemic right now?
Well, we have one daughter that lives in Kenora, and her partner lives in, her partner lives in Priestville, and she came here, and then we went to Saskatoon, and I don't know, a while back, a couple weeks ago maybe. I wouldn't do that now. I feel that there's quite a few more cases over Saskatoon way, and you just never know, right? So just again, cautious. I'm not paranoid or really afraid of catching the thing. I'd rather not, but I feel that I have a pretty good immune system and a healthy lifestyle, and so I feel that I would be able to shake it. My husband, however, is well, he says he doesn't have allergies, but he's a farmer and he's doing lots of coughing, and again, not COVID related, but allergy, I think. And so I would be I'm a little cautious, to bring it in to affect him, kind of thing. So, I mean, I don't want any of my family to get it, but I don't think it would be good if he caught it.
Yeah. So Beth, what do you think you'll remember most about this time? When all's said and done, whenever that may be, when you look back on it, what are the things that will stick out in your memory, do you think?
Well, one of the things is the craziness, how people were so crazy at the beginning. I mean, hoarding toilet paper? What on earth has that got to do with anything? And it was great for me to see on the upside. It was great for me to see people baking with their families again, because that was always a big thing in our family. My mother was a tremendous baker, and my grandfather used to make bread regularly. I don't say he made all the bread that they ate, but certainly regularly when I was a kid. Before that, I don't know, but I can just remember going to Grandma and Grandpa's. They lived in our yard, actually. And I remember going to Grandma and Grandpa's and having fresh bread, and he'd have it sitting out on the counter. And oh my goodness, that was it. He also served his wife, my grandmother, tea in bed every morning without fail. And I know he didn't do that his whole married life, but he did that when his grandchildren were there to observe that. And wow. I was just, when you think about the love there was, just is touching. And the baking. So the baking, everybody baking with their kids, that was great to see. And not just little baking, like bread is tricky, and doing that. And of course, then there was a shortage of yeast and flour and that kind. Well, not a shortage, but it just wasn't in the store as readily as there used to be. Also, people walking together as a family. That's so good to see. More physical activity, and biking, I understand, is a lot more people biking, that kind of thing. I'm glad to say that our daughter that has the grandchildren, she's a very outdoorsy person and has her degree in outdoor. Has had the kids outside not all the time every day, but every day they spend at least, even when it was cold, 2 hours they're outside and biking and just whatever, walking, having a good time, throwing the ball for the dog, whatever, just being a family. And that's just so great to see. Dad was working at home. I mean, she's a teacher, so she was working at home too. But again, I was so thankful, grateful that none of our children lost their jobs. They could all work from home, and it was a big relief. What you don't need is your kids moving in with you.
So you kind of just in this last question, Beth, started to answer this next question I'm going to ask you, but this is a heritage project, and one thing we're curious about is have people been using any of their sort of heritage, family traditions, cultural traditions to help either cope with this time or even just help pass the time? Did you or anyone in your family do that? You kind of mentioned baking. Was there any other things that you found that you were doing that really were kind of family heritage traditions?
Well, I'm a seamstress also. I'm a quilter. And so first of all, we started renovating our kitchen. Well, it first started way back in the fall. And my husband said, we are not doing anything until after Christmas. And thank goodness we didn't. But anyway, so we, and come January, we started and we pulled out the cupboards and you know, just did the prep work. But I painted, and I painted pretty much the entire interior of our home. And so that was a huge project. And so having done all that, then I didn't get to sew very much, because I could have sewed in the evening, but by the time supper was over, I was bagged. And so, no, I did not do the sewing. I could have, I guess, but I just didn't have. And of course, you know, Mom's sewing room is kind of a collection place. So everything that had to be moved went into the sewing room, and jeepers, like half the time I couldn't even see my sewing machine. So that was that for that. But yeah, and but after I finished the painting, then I did do some sewing also. And again, I'm so grateful, so thankful that my mother was a seamstress, and she was a very good seamstress, and she taught me how to do it properly. And then I have a cousin who is well, she's a world-renowned quilter and designer, and I worked for her for a little bit in her shop. And so I've got a really excellent resource for quilting, and know the proper way to do it. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So those are two things, and I do know that there were others that were knitting up a storm, and yeah, all those heritage things. I think there were a lot of people learning. Again, the baking thing, baking bread, they were learning how to do that, and passing the time, sure. But what a life skill to pass the time with.
And I also know you've been gardening lots.
Yes, yes. Well, I've always been a gardener. Again, part of my heritage. My grandparents were phenomenal gardeners, and as was my mother. My grandfather, her dad, actually was one of the first grafters in Saskatchewan. He grafted apples onto apple trees, and he grafted plums onto apple trees. I don't think there was another fruit because it wasn't available to him, but he would try and do a whole bunch of different apples on there. And then, you know, come spring, everybody hold their breath to see if the grafting wintered, and a lot of the time it didn't. But I understand, my mother told us that the University of Saskatchewan, the horticulturists would come to the farm when they lived on the farm and see what Grandpa had been doing for grafting. So he did bud grafting. So yeah, it was again, like I said, you know, it's part of my heritage, and which I am very grateful for, and very proud of, actually.
And do you preserve the produce you grow?
Oh yes, yes. I used to grow up a lot of fruit. I don't do so much anymore, but I did. I've decided now at my age that I'll let somebody else grow it, and I'll pick it, and then I can have as much, you know, just take what I need. If you have a tree, like I have one apple tree now, I used to have three. Well, what do you do with all the apples? You know, like, you can't give them away, right? So, and I certainly can't use them all. So anyhow, yes, I do. I can fruit, but that I don't grow here, obviously, like BC fruit, pears, peaches, plums, apricots, cherries. But all my garden produce, except for pickling, all my garden produce goes in the freezer. Yeah. And my mom was the same. Again, part of the heritage you learn how to do. And my mom was a hands-on person. One of her favorite saying is, you can't do anything sitting down.
Look at us right now.
So if you were weeding the garden, you better be on your hands and knees, not sitting there. If you were picking peas, on your hands and knees, not sitting there, because, you know, anyhow. Well, of course, when we shelled peas or did beans, whatever, we sat down. But that was one of her favorite expressions.
So Beth, I have just one last question for you. So what lessons for the future do you think might come out of this experience for you, your family, your community, or society as a whole?
One thing I would say right off the bat is I will never take family times together for granted ever again. I thought, oh my gosh, we had a gathering here on we celebrated our 45th wedding anniversary on March the 8th, and we had the whole family here on March the 7th. And the kitchen it was like a tumultuous time, but after the COVID thing hit, I thought, geez, am I ever grateful we did that? Because I don't know when, like before that, it was Christmas before we'd been together. And if it would have been until June until we got together again, it just would have been horrible. So anyway, yeah, and I like to think that we're a closely knit family. We, generally speaking, we get along quite well. So Don also has a sister in Winnipeg, and they were supposed to come at Easter time, and he has a brother in Calgary, and he was supposed to come at Easter time, and that didn't happen. We had seen them, Don's sister-in-law passed away at the end of January, and so we went out there for the funeral, and so we'd been together then. I thought, well, that's a good thing, because who knows when we're going to see them again, right? But anyway, yeah, I will never take that. That's going forward. I will make sure that we all, and I do mean all, appreciate our times together as a family. What other things can we learn from the future? Again, not to take anything for granted, I guess. The grocery stores, all the food that's in the grocery stores. We've always said, what a privileged life we have to be able to eat the way we do. Like it's phenomenal. You hear stories of people coming, well, it used to be from the Ukraine, but when the immigrants came in, and now it's from Africa or wherever, and they walk in the superstore and they start to cry because they've just never seen, such abundance. And we are so privileged. We really are. We don't think we're rich, but we are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Beth. Is there anything else that you want to share before we end the interview?
No, just to thank you and your cohorts for putting this together, because this is really important to preserve history in the making, and to speak to other people. What is it they say about history? There's always a different perspective. Well, you're going to talk to a whole bunch of different people, I expect, and so you'll get a whole bunch of different perspectives, and that's so important. That's really important, and I thank you. I count it as a privilege to be able to count it as one.
Well, thanks so much, Beth, and I'll stop the recording now, but if you just want to stay on before we end the call. But this has been Kristin, Catherwood, and Beth Graas on July 21st, 2020, speaking about COVID-19 in Saskatchewan.